so I'm going to be brief, but we wanted to have this opportunity to highlight some of the important features in the tax bill that I have proposed, particularly for Minnesotans who would lose and would lose at the federal level the particular deductions for their particular expenses that would result for some of them higher taxes at the federal level, and certainly Minnesota, and that's one of the important reasons why we propose to separate the Minnesota tax structure from the federal and then retain these deductions that we believe are very important. So I'll ask Commissioner Bowerly to elaborate and then introduce our guests.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, everyone. Last year, President Trump and the Republicans in Congress enacted a federal bill that overwhelmingly favored corporations and the wealthiest Americans. That federal tax bill also reduced or eliminated many tax deductions that Minnesotans rely on to reduce their tax expenses. The governor's bill takes a different approach. Instead of limiting these important deductions, the governor's plan protects important tax deductions that more than 900,000 Minnesotans and their families rely on each year. There are a number of deductions that are preserved under the governor's plan, and today I want to highlight just a few. Governor Dayton's tax proposal would protect the deduction for employees who have expenses related to their jobs, such as driving between different job locations, which are not reimbursed by the employer. Over 100,000 Minnesotans benefit from this deduction, saving an average of $419 annually. Governor's proposal would protect deductions Minnesotans count on to keep the cost of home ownership more affordable, including the ability to deduct property taxes. About 40,000 Minnesotans save an average of $500 annually. And a family that suffers a major loss, like a house fire, will still be able to deduct those losses under the governor's proposal. About 800 Minnesota families benefit from this deduction, saving an average of over $16,000 annually. As you will hear shortly, the tuition deduction is an important tax deduction for Minnesota families and students, and the governor's proposal will extend that tax deduction for tuition expenses for college or career training. About 27,000 Minnesotans can save qualifying individuals up to $282 a year with an average savings of $96. Approximately 70,000 homeowners in Minnesota will be able to keep deducting their mortgage insurance premiums, saving an average of $94 annually. And finally, while the federal tax changes will result in fewer Minnesotans itemizing and thus receiving tax breaks for their charitable contributions, under Governor Dayton's proposal, Minnesotans will be able to continue to itemize their charitable contributions. And the governor's proposal would also cut state income taxes for over 2 million Minnesotans. The governor is proposing a new personal and dependent credit of $60 per person on a return, so a family of 4 would save $240 on their taxes. It will save over 1.9 million Minnesotans an average of $117. The proposal also expands the working family credit, and 329,000 Minnesotans will see an average tax cut of $160 as a result. Throughout his 2 terms in office, Governor Dayton has promised to put the interests of Minnesota's families first, while preserving the integrity of our state's budget. Governor continues to deliver on that promise with this plan that improves family budgets without risking the stability of our state's budget. The governor's plan is for real Minnesotans who will see real benefits, and we are honored to have some of those individuals here with us today. I'd like to introduce some of the people who will share their stories about how protecting these deductions is important and will make a real difference in their taxes. First, let me introduce Kat Erder. Kat joins us from Kettle River. She is a heavy equipment operator who travels tens of thousands of miles for work each year. Under Governor Dayton's plan, Kat will be able to keep the deduction that covers her unreimbursed employee expenses. Kat?
Hi, my name is Kat Erder, and I am a Local 49 heavy equipment operator, and that my work requires me to travel. We go where the work is, so some of the businesses that we work for will provide per diem. Occasionally you'll come across those jobs, but the fact that they can write that off, but yet I'm not going to be able to write off those exact same expenses this year is very unfair, at least. It's going to impact me greatly because I work only 6 months out of the year living in Minnesota because we have winters off. So layoff time when tax time comes, it's an important supplement to my income. I consider it part of my wage, so because of this tax bill, I may not be able to travel, or it's going to cost me in wages. Let's see, with this new bill, apparently I'll be getting $1,200 back from the state, which would be a great help. It doesn't offset the amount that we're losing on the federal, but it definitely does help. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Maddie Hara. Maddie is a University of Minnesota student whose family saves hundreds of dollars a year by deducting tuition expenses. And under the governor's plan, her family will be able to keep that deduction. Maddie?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Maddie Hara. I am a University of Minnesota student. I'm actually a senior. I'll be graduating in about 2 to 3 weeks. And so obviously student loans and my tuition debt are a big topic on my mind. And as a sibling, I have 2 siblings, one who is 4 years older, so was graduating at the time when I was entering college, and one who is about a year younger, so we've been in college almost all 4 years, actually about 3. And so having 3 students pursuing higher education in my family, it's very important for my parents especially to be able to utilize this tax deduction, and it does benefit my family greatly. Thanks.
And next, I'd like to introduce Alicia Cervantes. Alicia grew up in St. Paul's East Side neighborhood and continues to live there today with her family. Alicia used to work as a bookkeeper, but now works as a full-time personal care attendant for her mother, who has had a devastating stroke a few years ago. Alicia and her family will benefit from the governor's plan to create a new personal and dependent tax credit. Alicia?
Hi, thank you. Hi, my name is Alicia Zapita, and the tax credit will help. There's a lot of expenses, and I really am trying to have a little bit more disposable income to be able to afford this wheelchair accessible van for my mom. Getting her to appointments is very hard, and just kind of a quality of life thing for her, even though we've had her home for 7 years, taking care of her with assistance. That extra disposable income would really benefit us to be able to afford that. Thank you.
Questions on this subject?
Governor, Republicans this morning are pushing back hard. They say that this is a tax increase, in particular because of the clawback on the tax cuts you signed last year, that you want that back, and also the provider tax, which you were allowing to go forward. Would you comment on that? That's a tax increase for everyone, you're saying.
The clawback is on the business property taxes. It doesn't affect individuals. It's about their proposal to freeze those levels for the next decade, which would cost about $1.2 billion. Then maybe they're attributing to personal income is to the tax cut for premium cigars. I don't think a whole lot of Minnesotans go around buying and smoking premium cigars, so that's a very isolated group of people. And then the estate tax, which again, it affects only a very limited number of people. So, you know, I have a very hard time with people who have to distort what it is I've done in order to attack it. And, you know, they can do the math. They're smart people. They know that we've cut personal income taxes for over 2.2 million people. We're continuing the Minnesota Care tax, which is on providers, healthcare providers, which then the Department of Revenue attributes then will result in higher medical bills for everybody who are consumers of health medical care in Minnesota, which means that it's by nature regressive. But that, compared with current law, they're comparing my proposal with letting that tax lapse as it's scheduled to the end of 2019, which would mean Minnesota Care basically would disappear. And so that would be the trade-off. But it's just intellectually dishonest on their part. And they're smart enough to know what they're doing. And, you know, I keep saying, where's their tax bill? You know, if they just put their tax bill out, then we can compare theirs to mine and see whose priorities are reflected in what. But it's just a I'll let Commissioner Bauer if you want to add anything, but it's just when people can't be honest with their critiques, it says there's something wrong with either their proposal or with their basic integrity.
The analysis released by the Department of Revenue this week shows that compared to current law, so the current law, of course, includes the provider tax, the governor's proposal is extremely progressive. For those of you who follow the details of the economic analysis around progressivity and regressivity of taxes, we have a suits index, and typically scores on that fall between -1 and +1, and the governor's proposal is a 2. So it's extremely progressive, and it represents a tax cut for everyone in the bottom 90% of Minnesota income tax filers. Only the top 20% would see an increase as a result of those. And a big part of that is because of the 2 million people who will see a tax cut as a result of the new personal dependent credit and the expansion of the working family credit. Thank you.
Other questions on this topic?
Governor, you had called this really complicated. The first time you walked out here, you warned us, embraced us, this was going to be complicated. Are you worried now with just about a month left in session that there's time to do such complicated work?
Well, the clock's been ticking on them since they arrived. What we're told, I don't know this directly, is that they can't get their tax bill out of their respective caucuses, the Republican House and Senate caucuses. And that's why they haven't come forward with a bill. But yes, the clock is ticking. They have to get their bills out of caucus. They have to get them through the committees. They have to then bring them to the respective floors and then take it to conference committee. Because as I told the leaders again on Tuesday, I'm not going to negotiate final bills with the House and the Senate separately. They're a co-equal branch of government, but they're as the legislature, not as two separate bodies. So, we'll certainly get feedback as asked, and Commissioner Bauer spoke to with the Senate Tax Committee this morning. So we'll certainly provide that feedback, but we're not going to get into final negotiations. So if they can't even negotiate competently among themselves, that doesn't bode well that we're going to have enough time to thrash out our differences and get something before me that I could sign.
I have a follow-up actually for Commissioner Bowerly, if you don't mind. Commissioner, you said that it result in an income tax reduction for the bottom 90%. Does that factor in the provider tax costs? And if not, well, that's what Republicans are going to say. So can we get those numbers with all the changes factored in, not just income tax?
Sure. Well, one correction, I did say the bottom 80%. That's what showed in the analysis.
I didn't hear you correctly.
And that is relative to current law. Current law includes the provider tax. The governor's proposal to extend the provider tax will mean that no one is paying a single dollar more in the provider tax than they are today. I think, Minnesotans, when they think about their taxes, they think about their current economic situation, they think about their family's budget. They don't often think about whether a tax provision has a sunset or not. If they are, they might be thinking about the federal tax bill actually has a sunset on some of the individual tax rate cuts at the federal level. But I think Minnesotans think about their daily budget, and compared to what they are paying today, what the current law is, the governor's proposal will reduce taxes for everyone in that bottom 80% of taxpayers across the state.
Provider tax, then the governor's proposal on that is factored into that 80% number that you just quoted?
The provider tax is current law. And so compared to current law, the governor's proposal will reduce taxes on 80% of Minnesota taxpayers.
Is it fact or even assume that the provider tax is passed on in its entirety to the patient in the end? Do we know?
I think there is analysis on that, but I would need to, we'll get that to you. I wouldn't want to speak to that today.
Have you heard from the
That's all due respect to the Department of Revenue, that's a long debated point. I mean, the same thing is true for corporations, and they use that. That's why the pharmaceutical industry is saying, well, if you put a tax on a penny a pill, the consumers are going to pay that amount. And same with, if you could use that argument against any corporate taxation, which is going to then be, some of that's going to be paid by consumers. How much of it is passed on depends on a variety of factors, competition and the like. But so it's not that it's invalid, but you can't apply that principle selectively to one particular tax, healthcare provider tax. If you take it, then you're going to have to attribute all corporate taxes. And then you have to figure out who's going to use those various products or services. And, as I say, corporations use that argument to try to prevent any corporate taxes. And this is very much what a provider tax is parallel to. But, if we don't have the provider tax, we don't have Minnesota Care. And that's the way it's slated to unfold after 2019 when that tax ends. And then as soon as that corpus is exhausted, in a matter of months, there will be no Minnesota Care. And the next governor and next legislature will have to deal with that reality. But again, as the commissioner said, we're dealing with current law and my bill compared to that. And I think it's just really very specious on their part to be claiming compared to something that after no longer exists.
The Medical Association or the Hospital Association been lobbying you to let the sunset stay in place, or would they rather see it reactivated?
I think they recognize, as I do, this is not going to be taken up by the legislature until next year when they have to walk up to the cliff at the end of 2019 to face that. So, I mean, they have not put pressure on me because they don't see it as necessary at this point.
Do you disagree with the decision to include that provision in the analysis by the department? My understanding is it was requested by the legislature's fiscal staff.
I know, they're professional career people, and, they provide the analysis based on, as I said, the assumption that the costs, those additional costs are borne by the healthcare users. And I've seen that debate, among economists and others regarding various forms of taxes on anybody other than individuals and what the effect then is on what individuals pay for products and services. And that'll go on long after I'm disappeared too. So, there's a valid assumption, but it skews, as commissioners point out, it skews their analysis of my bill's progressivity or regressivity, and consistently, most of everything that I've done in the last 7 years is to make Minnesota's overall tax system more progressive. And it's noted that the tax incidence study that the department does every other year, various national groups that have assessed Minnesota relative to other states. And so, in the absence of a bill that they have to take responsibility for, to keep misrepresenting mine so they can have something to talk about, I think is just really reprehensible.
Governor, one area that Chair Chamberlain this morning indicated that he possibly agrees with you is adjusted gross income. Could you describe why that's important to Minnesota taxpayers and the changes you want to make there?
Can you give Sure.
Sure. The Minnesota's current starting point. That's yours. Not mine. Excuse us. The current starting point for Minnesota taxes is federal taxable income. We're one of about 6 states that starts there. And the governor's proposal would move us to adjusted gross income, which is an earlier starting point, if you will, in the tax calculation. And that would give Minnesota more control over our budget. And I think there is some good news with respect to what we heard from Chair Chamberlain and what we've heard from Chair Davids, is that they both agree that moving Minnesota to adjusted gross income is a good starting point. So that's a significant piece of this conversation where we have a starting point on which to agree.
Governor, do you see a tax agreement as preferable to get done, necessary to get done? I know that there's some potential headaches next year if it's not done, but what has to happen this year?
Well, they're talking about taxable year of calendar 2018, but the tax bills come due for people next April of 19, although people pay in advance alike. I'll let the commissioner, I don't know if it changes withholding amounts during this calendar year, but other than that, the impact, but it's going to mean when that impact is going to take effect next year, the next administration is going to have an extremely limited amount of time, and the legislature, if they're going to change the law at that point to avoid some of these negative consequences, they're going to have to do it in the first couple of weeks of January. And as we know, the legislators are not inclined to make those kind of, very impactful decisions at that stage of the session. So, and then, of course, the department will be under the gun to conform all of their measures and forms and procedures to whatever the legislature does yesterday.
So are you saying it's essential that it be done by May 21st?
Saying the impact will be felt next year, but if there's no bill, there certainly will be an impact.
The governor is correct. There will be an impact if the legislature doesn't act this session. There will be about 300,000 Minnesotans who will face about 60 million more in taxes next year if we do not do something to respond to the federal tax bill. And all Minnesotans will face a more complex filing system. And the department, software vendors, everyone in the tax filing ecosystem needs a great deal of time to make the changes that would be required as we do each year. When last year's tax bill was passed, the department spent all summer and fall working with vendors to make sure that we were ready for tax filing season come January. And so really time is of the essence.
But are working people going to get their biweekly paychecks? Are they going to see a larger amount withheld on the assumption of higher state taxes?
I think individuals could certainly make decisions about their withholding based on that. We know the IRS put out new withholding tables earlier this year, so those would probably be what people are relying upon. But individuals can make choices about their withholding at any point during the year.
Ask on this topic. Can Kat tell us what piece of equipment she operates?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I operate a scraper, 627 scraper.
Can you tell us lay people what that is?
It's the biggest machine on the job site,
All right.
and we make all the money for the people because we move all the dirt.
And these are the projects you talk about pulling pipelines?
Pipelines, railroads, we did a rail all the way through North Dakota, housing developments here in the cities, and road projects.
A couple of rail lines I'd like to encourage you to, maybe just go ahead on your own. If we pay for the travel expenses.
Yeah, if I was an independent contractor, my travel expenses, I could actually file those on a Schedule C. But unfortunately, I'm a worker, so I can only use Schedule A, and that was taken away from us.
And that's a good point, you made that before, but the businesses can continue to deduct those expenses.
Exact same
and
expenses.
The workers cannot.
Yeah, it's the same exact expenses. If they pay for the hotel room, they can write it off. If I pay for it, I can't. So doesn't really matter what the other numbers are in the tax return. It's washes out with that. For me, it's a pay cut.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Good on this topic.
Thanks. All right. Thank you all very, very, very much. Good luck to you in Australia. Thank you. Anything else?
Governor, you could have a bill coming to your desk that would penalize people for misrepresenting service dogs. I don't know if you've been briefed on this. There'd be a penalty fee. Do you have thoughts on this?
Beyond a couple of things I've read about it. I'm not going to comment on the particulars of bills when I haven't read the actual bills or know the details. At what point, I mean, first thing comes to mind, how do you differentiate what is a service dog and what is not, and based on individual needs, but I'll look at it.
Any other questions?
Governor, the House and Senate are moving some of their spending bills right now, specifically in health and human services and education. They seem to be lacking a lot of your priorities. I was wondering if you might weigh in on that.
Well, I can't make them, to the extent they're budget bills, I can't make them, spend additional money that they're not going to go ahead and do. But more problematically is they're going to put in some of their own measures related to policy items, which is going to make it, probably difficult, or if not impossible, for me to sign the bills. And then, we're going to lose a lot of things that we agree on because of the handful of things that we disagree on. And again, I urge them on the Tuesday breakfast not to do that, not to try to ram things down my throat that they know I disagree with by putting things in that I'd like to see. There's nothing that the administration has to have in this session. There are things that are very important to have, things that are going to benefit the people of Minnesota, like a tax bill. But there's nothing that we have to have. So, you know, if they're going to force me to veto every bill because they put in unacceptable parts to it, I urge them again, do it soon enough, you know, so that we can come back to the negotiating table after you've gone through your act and I've gone through mine. There's still time, but if they come, you know, the Friday or Saturday before the end of the session, there's just not going to be that opportunity. And the people who lose out are the people of Minnesotans who would benefit from those provisions. This should not be about who wins, you know, who can make who look bad and the like, which is what I think some of this is being driven by. Talking points this summer and fall. That's a very, very poor way to legislate. Yeah, there are a lot of Minnesotans who have a lot at stake with these various provisions, and they deserve to be put first.
The tax conformity provisions, are you saying that that is not something that you need to have coming out of this session?
Well, I mean, it's not going to be a shutdown. I mean, I'm saying things that have to have, or you know, agencies can't function, or various services can't be provided. That, you know, that's a high bar. But, you know, are people going to be affected if there's, I mean, as the commissioner said, not this year, but next year certainly if there's not a tax bill, and if they can't know this year what they're going to be able to do when they file next year, it's going to be more than an inconvenience. It's going to be a major disruption for a lot of people, and it's going to cause a lot of havoc next year. And, but that, you know, that's down the road.
Given that, from a strategic standpoint, Governor, then if you don't have the government shutdown potential, how do you get the leverage that you need to get what I think you're saying are important tax provisions for Minnesotans? How do you get the leverage in the end of session negotiations?
Keep talking to the legislature, keep saying we're available. I had a bill out there for 5 weeks, you know, which they want to keep, you know, whacking at. They put their bills on the table and then get them passed, so we have something to negotiate. If they want to resolve the session responsibly, that's the way to do it. Pass their bills, go to conference committee, sit down with the administration, negotiate, and work out hopefully a mutually acceptable solution so we can have a bill. But if they want just, you know, talking points to go back to their various constituencies and say, well, we tried to put this in and, you know, Governor vetoed it, and well, he vetoed a lot of other things that are probably things we could agree on. But they know what they're doing. I mean, they design the bills, and if they send bills to me that have unacceptable features, when they know that, then I say, well, what's their motive? You know, is it to get something responsible legislation that's going to benefit various people in Minnesota, or is it to have talking points for the summer and fall?
Thank you.
Thank you.